Hey, what's up? My name is J.M. Chaley and welcome to my channel. This week I'm going to try something new. This week is going to be the first segment in a series of videos that I'm going to do called Creature Spotlight. And I'm not going to do these back to back all in a row. I'm going to pepper them in here and there in an ongoing series about supernatural creatures and how they appear in fiction, specifically supernatural beings, elves, dwarves, goblins, vampires, ghosts, things like that. I want to get into all different kinds of stuff. Leprechauns? I don't know, maybe, right? So I want to really delve into a lot of what I think fantasy authors will bring to the table in terms of some kind of weird protagonist or antagonist who's not quite human but might be something else. So let's talk about these things. We put them in our books. We love to read about them. Let's talk about supernatural creatures. And the first one I want to cover today is someone that I think has been bereft of representation, bereft of accuracy. Can I even say that? We're talking about fantasy stuff. This is all made up. How can something be accurate? I'm talking about the Siren, the first supernatural creature that I want to talk about. The first supernatural being I want to talk about is the Siren. I love sirens. I think their story is amazing. It's compelling when you read about them in Greek mythology. But when you go to fiction now, modern fiction, be it movies, novels, television, anything, and you go and you're looking for content on sirens, what do they give you? Mermaids. They give you mermaids. I don't know why suddenly sirens have become mermaids. Look, if that's how you like your sirens with fishtails, great, knock yourself out. I mean, there are mermaids. You can have those too. But I'm just saying, there's also sirens. And some people say, well, they're the same thing. And that's okay. But the things with sirens is that unlike, say, a vampire, where I can sit there and say, I like the classic vampire, the Bram Stoker vampire. I like the Anne Rice vampire. I like the Stephanie Meyer's vampire. Sorry, I had to... No, I'm okay. You know, I like the Sookie Stackhouse type vampire, right? Any kind of vampire that you're into, they have different flavors and you can kind of get into them and pick your own depiction. But with sirens, lately, they just feel one note. And that note is mermaid. I'm sorry. If fantasy fiction was a restaurant and I went in and ordered a siren story and they handed me a mermaid story, I'd be sending it back to the kitchen. Yes, I'm going to want to speak to your manager, Dennis. So yes, if it's up to me, let's ditch the fishtails on sirens, please. And you know what? While we're at it, can we just get these ladies out of the water completely? Out! Out! They don't belong in the water, okay? Look, if that's how you like your sirens, that's cool. It's still cool. Mermaids are cool. I'm not going to trash on mermaids. Listen, mermaids are good. I'm going to do a video on mermaids. You'll see. Lots of love for mermaids. But let's show some love for the siren. So where did it all start? How did this happen? How did we get to the place where we're plugging fishtails on sirens? Here's a statue from 370 BCE. And this probably doesn't look like anything that we've seen recently in the way of a siren at all. Wings, bird feet, what's going on? Here's a statue from the 1st century BCE. Same kind of deal. Maybe looking a little angelic. Here's another statue from the 4th century BCE, even older. Right? With the wings, not quite as bird-like, maybe more angelic, if you can. I mean, I know that we're dealing with a different religion here, but, you know, just the same. You know, with the bird feet, very, very different. No fish, no fishiness. So who were the sirens? What's their deal? What's up with the wings? What's up with all this kind of stuff? There were originally 7 sirens. Some stories say 5, but we have the names of 7 of them. And they were beautiful maidens, and they sang, and they were very, very talented musically. Yeah, they had feathers, they flew around, they sang, and really they didn't cause much trouble for anyone, I don't think. And then Hera came along, and she suggested that the sirens and the muses should have a singing contest. So the 7 sirens versus the 9 muses had a sing-off. And guess who won? The 9 muses. So the muses win, and at Hera's prompting, they defeathered the sirens. They plucked all the feathers from the sirens and wore their feathers as crowns upon their head in victory. And if that wasn't bad enough, because they lost, I'm not sure the sirens knew the stakes of this contest. This is pretty tragic. They were banished and exiled to this island where they were alone. Just the 7 of them on the island, stranded. There was no food, there was no game, nothing to eat. There were some depictions in some myths that talked about wildflowers growing on this island, but really there wasn't anything for them to live off of. And they were exiled. And they were featherless. They had no way to fly away. They couldn't fly away anymore. That was the original Greek story of the sirens. Now, they've been depicted with wings and feathers afterwards, after we know they were exiled. For example, we see this vase from about 475 BCE depicting Odysseus, and you can see the sirens flying overhead. So, okay, artists really couldn't agree on how to depict the sirens. Everyone kind of knew they were supposed to have wings, and maybe they didn't know how to draw them or paint them or sculpt them in their plucked forms. Like, what were they supposed to look like afterwards? Don't think they had fishtails underneath. I'm sorry, I can't let that go. One of the sirens, from being trapped in this island, was so distraught over her imprisonment, she couldn't bear it anymore, and she threw herself into the sea, and she drowned. And this is extremely tragic and horrible, but it also shows that she didn't sprout a tail, she didn't swim off. Indeed, if anyone had feathers, they could have flown away from their island of exile. If they had fins, they could have swam away from their island of exile. But no, they were plucked. They had no fishtails. They were trapped on the island. And that's why they lured sailors to their island. The Greeks talked about this as well. The first ship that came along was the Argo. You may have heard stories of Jason and the Argonauts. Now, for these guys, they were lucky to have a man named Orpheus on board who played the lyre. And his music, really, drowned out the siren song. So they're singing, trying to lure the Argo in, and he's playing up a storm, and he overpowers their music with his, and they sail off. Decades later, another ship comes by. I'm sure many more ships have come by in this time, but as far as the Greek myths are focusing on, the next ship that goes by is carrying none other than Odysseus himself. Odysseus has heard of the sirens, and he tells his men to plug their ears with wax so they can't hear the siren song. But he wants to hear the songs. So he has his men strap him, tie him up to the mast of his ship where he can hear but not escape. He tells them, don't cut me loose as much as I command you and beg you until we're free of the sirens. And of course he's screaming, let me out, I want to be with them, I want to jump overboard, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, sir. They drive off, or sail off. You know. And we see this in this mosaic. This is from the 2nd century, and we see the classic sirens. And again, they're being shown with wings here. But for whatever reason, they're not flying off the island, but you can see Odysseus and his ship coming up. But then something happens. Something starts to change in how we're seeing sirens and what happened. Suddenly, we're giving them fishtails. Now, I don't know if this is the first depiction of a siren with fishtail, but this one was done in 1240, around 1240, and you can see this particular siren shown with a mermaid-type tail. So you think maybe, okay, maybe this is when we turn the page and we start looking at sirens differently. We're depicting them as mermaids, right? We crossed that line, we blended those two mythical creatures together. Well, no, because for hundreds of years we were still seeing them the way the Greeks saw them, with feathers and bird feet and all this kind of stuff. Check out this painting from 1891 showing the very classic siren. Again, we're dealing with Odysseus here, and we can see all the bird features. They're flying around. What happened? We just saw them as mermaids, and 600 years later, we're seeing them as the bird ladies again. And then, in this painting from 1909, they look like mermaids. And this is only 18 years after the painting I showed you before. People couldn't make up their minds. They didn't know how to depict them. Throw in also Hans Christian Andersen's story, The Little Mermaid, that came out in 1837. And you have the story of a young mermaid who sings. But she's not attracting ships to her. She just happens to have a pretty voice. So now you throw that in the mix, as mermaids are now being depicted in popular culture at the time. And you have legends of the Sirens that are occasionally shown with fishtails for some reason. And oh my God, right? So we see what's going on here. But now everything seems to put a fishtail on a siren, or at least put them in the water. One of them drowned. They don't, I'm not to say they can't swim, but they're not going to just live in the ocean. That's not how they were depicted. And as much as the art was shown with them with wings and feathers and everything like that, they were plucked by the muses. So they were meant to be trapped on that island, regardless of how they were depicted in art. That's why they had to lure men in ships to shore. But let's talk about that, because now, why are they luring people in? There's a couple of theories about that I'd like to talk about. There's three main theories. One, they wanted to lure men in because they were lonely. I personally don't like that theory because, and by the way, this is where the whole siren comes from, the temptress. Ooh, she's gonna lure you in, love you, watch out. I don't know. It seems to me if you want to lure in some men for a good time, you're not gonna have them crash on the rocks and drown. You're gonna probably bring them in so far and then say, okay, yeah, put your little dinghy in the water. That's not meant to be sorry. And then take your smaller boat and come to shore and watch out for those rocks, and I'll be waiting. Sweetie, or whatever. I don't know what they would have said. Flirting. I don't think that happened. Anyway, we're talking about mythology. But it didn't make sense in the myth. The second theory is that they ate the men. They brought them in to devour the men because there was no food on the island. And some of the tales talked about the skeletal remains of humans that were strewn about the desolate waste of their island, on the rocks and everything like that. So maybe, but again, if you're bringing men to shore to eat them, you don't want them crashing into the rocks and drowning. That's your food. You shouldn't waste food. That's my mom told me that. The third way is the way that I kind of like, and that's that sirens either were or became sort of a psychic vampires, more like they fed off the emotions of others. Their songs drove men mad with love, and they would fall in love with the sirens and desperately try to get to them, driving their ships right into the rocks if need be. In this scenario, you don't necessarily need the men to survive. You're having a smorgasbord of love energy, or whatever it is, off this ship, and all these men that are drowning, they're not panicking, they're not freaking out, they're just like, I don't know, hey baby, I don't know. But they're catcalling, I don't know what I don't know. All these himbos drowning at sea, I don't know. But they're feeding all this kind of energy during the entire process. And yeah, some of the men maybe were able to clamber onto shore and survive for a little while, but there's no food there. They probably starved to death, wasting away, just feeling nothing but love for these sirens as their songs continue and everything like that. And they're feeding off the energy of these men. I think that's tragic and horrifying both. And ultimately, that's what the sirens were, a tragic people. I mean, these women were the victims of this terrible contest, stranded on this island. they weren't meant to get off. They weren't meant to fly away or swim away. And even the word siren, what have we done with that? It means siren, the loud, caterwauling, mewing cat sound that comes out of police sirens and ambulances, right? Whereas the muses, that word now means music. So even after all these years, the language evolved in such a way to immortalize these mythological beings in one way where the muses yet again win. And they're immortalized in the legacy of the word music. The sirens are immortalized in the word siren. What a slap in the face. A siren that was maybe alive today might have a bone to pick with a lot of this that's going on. That's a story that I'd like to write one day. And it's actually a story I plan to write after my Half Succubus trilogy that I'm working on right now. I'm going to begin a Siren series. So that's another reason why I wanted to pick the Sirens as my first video to cover for the Creature Spotlight. If you are a writer and you have a siren story, or if you're a reader and you know of a siren story, please drop in the comments. I want to know. Let me know. I want to know a good siren story. Not swimming in the water. I'm talking the singing, trapped on the island, got off the island somehow, maybe as a descendant. Who knows? I don't care. I want the original tragic siren. We need some variety in the siren spectrum, so you can have your mermaid types and your water-breathing types and whatever, and then have your other types, just like vampires. We get lots of different kinds of vampires, lots of different kinds of werewolves. I want lots of different kinds of sirens, and the one siren we're missing, in my opinion, is the actual siren. So make with the sirens, please, authors. So that about wraps it up. That's Sirens. My take on Sirens. I'm not bitter, really, mostly. If you like this video, give it a like, and as always, subscribe. I post every Thursday, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can read the first chapter of my work in progress, A Flower in Hell, on my website, jmchaley.com. You can also send me a message from there. You can join my mailing list. Let's stay in touch. It'll be fun. Thanks for checking out my video. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.